if we hear how they arrived at the 300
the areas
million,
of differences
I'll really
are
appreciate
minor and they can be resolved with
thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this discussion.
With that, Chairperson, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa, Honorable Peters. Sorry for not seeing your hand.
Director General, Home Affairs.
Remember, you have got that right here that you shouted the chairperson. I want to talk.
Just waiting.
Please come in.
For Adam to load a presentation.
Chairperson, I'm sitting in a very awkward position. Can I switch? Be allowed to switch off the camera?
Please, it's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Chairperson. Thank you very much, Dr. Mampo and team, for the presentation. And like Honorable Matafa and Honorable Sahupen has indicated, it is truly a very short bill, and it goes direct to the point. My first question, Chairperson, is that I would want to know how much, if you take off the 32 billion or whatever, how much is 32.9 billion? How much is remaining in the contingency fund? Secondly, Chairperson, it is very interesting that South Africa has got this insurance called SASRIA. And I want to know, Chairperson, from Dr. Mampo, whether this is a uniquely South African issue and whether there is other countries in the world that has got this particular type of insurance, and its affordability and the history behind it. But also, how long has South Africa been having this cover? And is many of the businesses aware that they could actually enlist for a minimum premium with SASRIA? So it would be important for us to know as the committee. But also, Chairperson, I've noted, and I would believe that it's because probably the agricultural sector has not been quantified, because I would believe that the loss in terms of crops, the loss in terms of the value of the land now that some of the crops have been burnt down, how long it will take to recover, maybe that has not been costed. But has there been overtures or engagements by the Department of Land Reform and Agriculture, together with their provincial counterparts, to National Treasury for an assessment of this nature? Maybe I must go back to the question raised by Honorable Sarupen, whether the damage has been quantified, and if it then happens that there's excess needed for SASRIA, where would National Treasury then get those resources? But also, Chairperson, one would want to know, these businesses that have been affected, that will be supported through SASRIA, have National Treasury and the Department of DTIC and small business done an assessment? Because, Chairperson, every opportunity that government makes to intervene in the economic space, to alleviate the pressures of our communities, to do whatever has been actually met with corruption. And I think it is important that we get to know whether National Treasury and the relevant departments have put in place systems that can avoid double dipping, can avoid people abusing this particular intervention. But also, Chairperson, you'd remember with the intervention that was done for the small business in the COVID, in the pandemic environment, the small businesses, in particular Black-owned and women-owned, claimed that they did not qualify, even in terms of the loan guarantee schemes that were introduced. You'd find that there are companies or there are businesses, especially those run by Black people, that are unable to qualify. And at the end of the day, then these resources don't get spent, then they revert back to the National Revenue Fund. So it is important for us to know whether this has been quantified, what is National Treasury and the relevant departments going to do if there is going to be double dipping? And how do you make it possible that you prevent fraud and corruption in this process? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Peters. Honorable Nkwankwa.
Chair, to some extent, the previous speakers have covered me, but there are certain points I want to raise. Firstly, I think it's important that we are told about what conditions are going to be attached to the support that is being given to businesses that were affected by the unrest. Why? Because we can't keep doling out money to businesses that aren't aligned with the socio-economic objectives of the country that we seek to achieve. I want to put it to you, at times we bail out businesses that continue to employ illegal and undocumented migrants with the sole intention and purpose of exploiting them so that they maximize profit while excluding the majority citizens from the economic mainstream. If businesses aren't made aware of that and we don't put conditions in place to ensure that their objectives that they want to achieve are at least aligned with the socio-economic development objectives of the country, we are wasting our time and wasting the taxpayer. I like this SASRA. I think the first time I heard about this SASRA insurance was when I started working for a bank. And I'm glad for the first time to see it in action. But the question I want to ask is, at what point does it kick in? Does it only kick in when malls and big businesses are being affected? In instances of looting and violence in the townships, especially the xenophobic violence that flared up, I think, in 2015 and 2008, although when it started, it targeted shops, say, of foreign nationals, but it got to a point where it got out of hand and other people's businesses in the townships were affected. But there was no similar intervention. At what point then do we tap into the SASRIA facility, or at what point do we provide this kind of assistance? Is it only when businesses in upmarket areas are affected, or can we in future say if something similar happens? Because remember, even that looting that takes place in the townships during those instances, especially that goes to the extent of affecting other people's businesses. We should be able to have some kind of intervention because it affects their livelihoods. That's the second question. The other issue, which I think for me is important, is the creation of this industrial loan facility, the reprioritization of this 500 million rands. How many businesses are going to be affected by this reprioritization? The TES facility that was provided there was massive corruption and fraud, but you don't see any naming and shaming. You don't see any companies being held responsible. You don't see anyone being arrested. But if we were politicians, I'm sure we'd be arrested by now. We tend to turn a blind eye to private sector corruption in South Africa. So if we can't make statements of hope and say we hope people aren't going to double dip or triple dip. People are going to double dip and triple dip if there are no proper systems put in place to ensure that there are sanctions in event, harsh sanctions in events that people tap into this scheme fraudulently. So I think we need to put measures in place to ensure that doesn't happen. And in instances where it does happen, because it will happen, and knowing the kind of people we're dealing with in South Africa, whether you talk about the private or public sector, what sanctions are we going to impose? But we must get to a point where if people commit fraud in these things, that there must be naming and shaming, and we must publicly see what kind of sanctions are imposed. They're not long-winded investigations that never amount to anything. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kwankwa. Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you very much, Chair, and Dr. Mampo for making this presentation from Treasury. Let me take also the cue from my comrades, honorable members who made input around the presentation, the second appropriation bill. But I just wanted to, maybe before I go to question, just to check on, because, you know, this matter has been coming and going, Dr. Mampo, on the issue of post office as well. I know that it's not the Treasury which manage the post office, but you see the closure of some branches in the post office has actually, you know, posing a serious problems whilst we are talking about the issue of, you know, 350 grants that people are supposed to get, which at the end of the day, we may seem, you know, a serious problem as the time goes by, because I'm sure you have seen around the country.
All right. Good morning. It's 9:30.
We're desperate.
I would imagine that
poor people are making queue with the hope that they will,
if you can give guidance in that regard,
receive the grant. But
we are good to go.
Due to, you know, the threat of closure of post offices.
All right.
Some might be disappointed at the end of the day. I don't know how is Treasury going
this morning,
to, you know,
with ESCOM,
make sure that there's a collaboration between Treasury and the relevant institutions, such that now the people should not get disappointed at the end of the day.
This morning.
And,
recording in progress.
But I think that before we start, colleagues, there is an issue that I must raise.
Our experience through the PPEs,
chairperson of the board,
we have seen how people have amassed themselves. You know,
we received a 127-page presentation yesterday.
PPEs project monies which were not supposed
deadline,
to be theirs,
which we had asked.
We don't want to go through that.
Was last week Thursday.
Repeat that mistake again once more.
And this is
so I just want to check what measures
I'm trying as much as possible to be very calm.
In place, for instance, where some business have found to have engaged themselves in fraudulent activities,
ESCOM,
you know,
day
through
in and
double
day
dipping.
out when a schedule is a hearing has been scheduled.
I want to agree with Honorable Gwangwa that you may not find
I'm
only
not sure
at the public
how,
service corruption, but also in the private sector. But how Treasury is going to deal with that situation, because we have learned a bad experience through the PPEs
function
deals.
Optimally, effectively, and efficiently.
Lastly, Chair,
when for all intents and purposes,
I know it's not Treasury
a paper
going to deal with this issue at the end of
on
the day.
Eve of
I mean, it's not really part of
this one.
But I just want to throw it, Dr. Mampu.
Besides the fact that I don't think it's practical, I don't think it's
we don't want to get surprised, because some of the things get thrown into public.
But what is of significant concern,
you don't know what's going to happen.
This has been going on for quite a while.
I just want to sense, because, you know, higher education, or I mean,
and I just think, quite frankly,
the issue of COVID has brought about immense pressure on education in the country.
As to whether this is
so
how they want us to continue.
What measures are there that seek to deal with this challenge
that we just
because they seem to pose a very serious problem and pressure on the.
But every time we cancel, it's a victory for non-accountability.
I know it's not really part of this, but I just want to, because
non-oversight.
If there are issues that time and again gets into the public space and they create a problem, because we don't want to be taken by surprise that no, we are now short of money, therefore there's a need to appropriate, etc., because one is aware that
at the very least
COVID-19 has put a lot of pressure on the Department of Education. Thank you very much, Chair.
This kind of conduct is totally unacceptable. And I want to indicate that I've now reached the point where I'm at the end of my tether, at the end of my
I've had my hand up a long time. Thank you.
Taking this matter up with the House Chairperson. Presiding officers need to intervene, then they must.
You remember that,
so that
I gave you the right
can clarify
that I always ask who
they will determine how oversight will take place.
Yes, Chair.
So
and this is how they want to
just shout at me that when I ask for those names. Okay, let me allow Honorable Mlenzana to come in.
Chair, sorry for this.
No, it's got all the
I am in a
hallmarks
very
of
awkward
telling the rest of us
position
to
here.
go jump off
There's
the
even
nearest
wind.
cliff, actually.
So I could
127
hardly
page
catch up,
presentation
but
on complex
I had
financial
some
matters.
presentation from
And
Dr.
us having to
Mampo,
chase
and let
after
me welcome
ESCOM
it. And
and
then I
DPE
wrote
when the
on
deadline
chat
was
box,
not met.
because I thought I wouldn't be there. But let
And then
me
yesterday an email
talk
comes
to what I
through
wrote.
at 12:55
I wrote whilst Dr. Mampo was
saying that
still
here's the
presenting.
presentation, but has not been approved.
I'm partly
And so we're
covered
sitting
by
there
the
for
first part
whatever
of my
perspective,
question.
a draft presentation.
Colleagues
whom,
raised it
even if we chose to
around
delve
the
into
sources
to
of
prepare,
this funding. But then the second part
could have been changed.
would be
Not that presentations may not be
clearly
amended,
we
but
are
when there's a
actually
wholesale
robbing Peter to
qualification
pay
to
Paul
say
here.
there is no approval of a presentation,
And
where
I
does
think it
that
is high
face the
time,
committee
Dr.
for
Mampo,
preparation?
that
Our
our South
administrative
African
staff is
electorate
unable to
be schooled
proceed
around this.
effectively and
That money
efficiently
doesn't come anywhere.
with the work.
It comes from within. So surely there has been cuts.
To be quite
And now
frank,
if you
I
can
am
share
just
with us
sick and tired
how
of
much has
having to
been cut
repeat the
from
same
where
thing
and
over
what
and over
are
again.
the
I'm sorry,
impact
I just feel like I
that
must raise it
we
in
may
those strong
be
terms.
having to address, because
Day
surely
in and day
there
out,
is a
every time
negative
ESCOM has
impact
to appear
on the way
before us,
due
we
to
constantly have
this
to
cutting that
wrangle
has happened
about
to try
due
and get up to
process
this actually
and an inability to
appropriation.
communicate
Thanks, Chairperson.
efficiently, as if we are a bunch of unreasonable people in this committee if there are challenges. But it cannot be right that on the
thank you very
eve
much.
of a
Sorry,
meeting
Chair,
such as
I
this
must
one,
extend
which has
my
long been
apologies.
communicated,
I'm attending to 3 meetings simultaneously. It's very difficult to concentrate.
So I know
I thought you kicked me out because of meetings, but thank you for allowing me in again.
The lead members this morning, so that DPE and ESCOM.
Yeah, I've got a few questions that is some of them, but one of the, I see there's 250.
But what we are not going to do is give a victory to non-accountability.
Yes, I'm with you.
Maybe that is the motive.
Can you hear me,
to create an
we are losing you. Please,
if
you don't mind, you can switch off your video.
Honorable Hadden, Honorable Van
maybe you don't like my face. Thank you. Is that okay now?
One question.
I want to hear you. Yeah, please.
The 250 million allocated for the deployment of police officers and 700 for defense force.
When do you receive?
My question is, what measures is Treasury putting? And I know this is not entirely their responsibility to ensure that you get value for money, because on the ground, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, and what I'm observing, for me, to be honest with you, I believe a lot of this money that we're allocating is not getting value for money.
So
you find groups of police officers just standing around doing nothing. In fact, if I need them, I know where to find them. I find them at all the food outlets. I'd like to know how we're getting value for money, but I think my colleagues spoke about the issue of corruption and how these things are going to be managed, particularly now through SASRIA, with those businesses that have been affected. How is this going to be managed to try and prevent what we've had with PPE scandals and things, to ensure that the recipients of these are the people that have really been victims and that are entitled to what they're getting? The other issue is what measures are you going to put in place to ensure small businesses who now do not fall and have not taken the necessary SASRIA insurance in the past? Will in some way, what mechanism will you put to ensure that in the future we could cover these people? Because the unrest that we had and looting is only the beginning of many more to come, in my personal view, based on my understanding of what is going on in the country. So how would we try to prevent this? Because the impact on the fiscus and on the taxpayers and the borrowings that we are continuously, where we have now almost reached a fiscal cliff in this country, is going to impact on economic growth in this country if we're going to continuously borrow and borrow and borrow. So how are we going to mitigate against this and try and actually prevent that in the future? Now, the last thing that I want to touch on there, particularly those businesses, and you may have covered
I think you're making a mistake, sir. You're making a mistake.
Those businesses that are not covered at all, and I know that we gave an assurance there's going to be assistance to them. for you. When is this going to unfold? When is the process that is being followed? And we're inundated with calls from people that said the government was going to be able to effect our giving them assistance. So people are waiting for this assistance. And then, of course, lastly, I'll go to us. You've allocated this money for a fixed period of time. And remember that initially when we spoke about it, it was as a result of...
So I think
then we had a situation in the country where there was an anticipated protest march that was going to take, and police and the defense force were on high alert, were being deployed as well, which meant you needed further allocations to try and prevent it. Now, what is going to happen in the future? Because remember, that protest march has been postponed, not cancelled, postponed. How are we going to, because this is, I see, for a limited period of time, how are we going to plan for that future, for these protest march that are going to continue and this disruptions in terms of financial finances, particularly for defense force and the South African police.
Thank you so much, Honorable Sheikh.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good morning to everyone. Look, I do want to express the fact that it is a problem that the documents arrive so late.
Thank you very much.
We are very busy. I mean, everybody's busy, I get that, but we really have not had time to read these documents to the depth that we should do so. In fact, I've had to prepare largely on the SIU documentation. And I just want to put that on record, that it really does make it difficult when we don't get documentation on time.
Some of these things, it will be more of a matter of emphasis. And it is affecting us as honorable members.
DPE
take on this
because
thing.
what I want to be clear is that the deadline was last week Thursday.
An elephant in the room.
And
I think we have said this, that
we've been chasing after this submission the whole weekend.
It's a hush-hush
the whole weekend, and then it arrived at 12:55 yesterday.
They've paid back the money. But the initial
it's seemingly as if
a fraud, and
here
there seems
we
just
need
to be no
to toe the
appetite
line
to charge them.
Of
so it looks
DPE
like a big business or business.
That's what it is. So I would like an explanation.
Getting out of jail
before we proceed with
paying money.
Why is this happening, and what's its intention?
Justice, which
so that when I proceed with this matter to the presiding officers, at least I've got a basis upon which to proceed.
The majority
because I'm just not going to
so
do this
I think members, I think it's something that we should see how we
to subject the
There's
committee to a public perception that when we are preparing for meetings and asking questions,
but if it's a
we are just ticking boxes and to make ignorance out of us, to make fools out of us publicly as if we are unable to deal with the matters with the seriousness that it deserves.
What one is saying
this is a setup.
We can't allow that.
So,
where
Deputy Minister, I see
companies
that
have been involved in fraud.
to
Nobody goes to jail, nothing happens.
Can get
they just see, no, there was a settlement.
Because
settlement with who? Because this is the money that we sit here and appropriate. So, Dr. Mampo,
no, thank you very much.
I know that what you are saying doesn't necessarily concern
greetings to the honorable members,
but
as well as the board of ESCOM and the executives.
That's the issue.
Perhaps, Chair, I would like
I know for a fact
the Director General from an administrative point to really take the meeting to confidence in terms of the process that unfolded in specifically with respect to this inconvenience, Honourable Chair, which I fully understand and appreciate the anguish the honourable members are expressing. But maybe perhaps, Chair, if you could accede, can I ask the Director General to talk to this matter?
No, that's fine, DM.
Calling UIF, calling compensation fund. Colleagues, I think that's how, because we have never had a discussion with them. It's about 2 years now.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning,
money distribution, so that you can get it from
the Chairperson
the horse's mouth.
ESCOM.
It is a big
and
thing,
others who are on the line.
We need to.
Chair, we have.
I think the same. One will say
we have
the same
taken
thing
to heart
the South African special
the very strong ways that you have expressed
that is disaster
on the time that it has taken to
we also need to
get the pack.
I think the question is
to SCOPA
where our members wanted to know what happened.
And Chair, can we if there was
Darren, I think we should find a way,
an error on our side,
especially
maybe we should have communicated
and Department of Employment and Labor
the complexity as well as the level of effort that is required to compile the information that we are asked to come and share with yourselves this morning. We had received a letter on the 16th of August,
what do you propose
2021.
we must do to
The
deal with
day set for today,
the departments
and
entities
this process would be different
where
to the
you
process, for instance, that produced the board packs
make a
in
very
an
strong
SOC.
case for the
As you
allocation
know,
of money.
the board
But year in, year out, you find
agendas
that
tend to be
often
quite
in terms of
set out
underspending,
well ahead
greatly underspending.
of time, and they sit on a quarterly basis.
And
so there are processes
we
that
are
are
saying
already
here
quite
that the
mature
money
in
that
producing that
goes to them,
information.
there's an opportunity.
This
cost
one
of
was
that
quite
money.
a
It could
unique
have gone
request.
somewhere else and be used
And if
much
anything,
better.
we probably
But
add
you
in
get that, that's
asking
one
the
opportunity cost of
committee
it. But two,
to give us
the people who
more
are
time,
supposed to
as
benefit from,
can be seen from the
that,
pack. It's
from
quite
that
detailed
allocation by
information that
Parliament.
needs to be provided.
They never
and there's assurance processes that
and guess what?
both within ASCOM
Every time the people will be
DPE,
blamed for that will be
that we need to go
government in
through
general,
to ensure that the
doesn't exclude
information
us.
that is shared with
So
yourselves and the
again,
South African public
what do
is
we do?
accurate.
Because we seem to be
And
preaching one and
obviously
the
it
same
meets
gospel, but
with the
nothing
standards
changes.
of
Nothing changes.
accountability that you require. The commitment, Chair, that we want
Related
to
to questions again
make is
asked
that
by
we'll certainly
oral
communicate
members.
timeously
How do we measure the
on,
impact of these interventions?
on the lead times that would be
It's
required.
one thing to come
Number one. Number
here for
two,
Appropriations Committee,
will
Parliament,
ensure that
and appropriate
information,
money,
as you have put
right?
it,
But at the end of the day, what
is
we are concerned
presented
about
to the committees,
is the impact on economic growth,
on
the impact on inequality,
from what I've
employment
understood
creation,
Thursday
the
before the
impact
Tuesday meeting,
on
the
seeing
deadline, we ensure we adhere to that.
black business, women business,
going
youth
forward,
business, also
Chair,
taking a bigger stake
that's the
in
commitment
the economy.
That
we
we
can't always be coming here
want to
appropriating money,
reiterate, Chair, that
but
we take the
impact of it,
responsibility.
nobody seems to be saying yes, so much
to
was
account
spent.
for
2.02 trillion rand was appropriated by Parliament, was dealt with by this committee.
Where there happens to be
But
challenges.
what is the impact of that?
That is quite
I think we
apparent
need to start focusing on that.
very
Otherwise,
seriously.
these many zeros that always
and
come here and we
want to
allocate.
apologize
that's not
for,
what we're about.
for the situation
I think,
that we put
the department
in
dealt
this
with
morning.
that accounting
we are making a
exercise. We are
commitment
not
that we shall,
accountants. At the end of the day, when we distribute money, it's because we want to see change. And the biggest change that we're looking at it in this country is the inclusion of the people who are kept out
I
of
know
the
that you
economy for
referred this to the
350 years.
DG, and
Right.
I want
So
to
we
say
can't
whilst
always
the
be coming
explanation is noted,
and even knowing that
apologies
that
not
money they
accepted.
also receive
Precisely because we've been down this road
a great
before,
percentage of it.
and this was
As,
not a new meeting, it was a
Honorable
continuation of a
was
meeting
saying
which
that
we had on the very
talking
same
about
night.
Sastra.
And what
It's
I
the
want
first
to
time we
place
hear
on record
Sastra
is that
standing
this
up, but
committee is not
there
going
have
to
been
be
so many
victim of the
businesses
micromanagement
before,
of this commodity
and by and large,
relationship
those
that we
businesses
had.
would have been those
We had to chase after this
struggling businesses
presentation
in
after the
townships
deadline
and
had been
in
met,
rural areas.
simply because there was
But we've
no
never had
will on the
SASRA,
part of DPE
intervening.
or ESCOM
As
to
I said,
actually
that
just
as far as
comply
that is
to
concerned, I
what
think
was
we
going on.
definitely need to get time
And even when the
hearing,
presentation
to
arrived
allow the
yesterday,
honorable members to
it was that
interact
it
with
had still
SASRA.
not been approved. And so we were actually preparing in a vacuum, even with those very tight timelines. As Honorable Van Minen was saying,
spoke about this one,
and Honorable Hade was expressing,
the interventions,
Honorable
especially to small business and to DTIC. Is it grant or loans? And
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. Mr. Chairman,
when it comes to small businesses,
I'm not aware of
black businesses,
and I could very easily be wrong.
Is there any differentiation in terms of price discrimination?
It's submission of a report requested by SCOPA,
taking into
from
consideration
an
that
entity such as
people are
ESCOM
not
has to be approved
similar
by
challenges.
the relevant
is it a
department
grant or is it a
or
loan?
minister.
If it's a loan,
And
is there any
it seems to me
differentiation in
that
terms
part of the
price
problem,
that,
if not the whole problem, is
the
that
recipients
the
will have to pay for
reports
that money?
are channeled via the department rather than via the Minister's Office and Liaison Officer in Parliament
related
to the committee.
To some of the questions raised by our members,
unless
right?
there is some kind of
Again,
legal
it is a big concern
on us, and
it is a big
I,
concern
over my years in Parliament,
committees, Parliament in general,
frequently have seen reports come directly
how
to the relevant committee and not go via a department.
To reach one,
those might not have been appropriate, and so I stand open
it reaches
to
those
correction.
people on time.
Can we then resolve
so that they're able to
that in
a
future
day passes in business,
all reports from
without
ESCOM
proper
get
cash flow,
sent, they
cash
can be
flow
sent
when
to
there's
the
money
department
just
and the ministry,
it's a
but
long
they also
time.
get sent
So
directly
just saying
to
that
us.
how do we efficiently
And we can
ensure
assess
that this money
the actual
reaches
content of the
intended,
report timeously, but also
beneficiaries. I think
whether
those would
ESCOM
be my
actually
questions
are the
before
culprits
I
here.
go back to Dr.
Mr. Chairman,
Mampo.
that's my request, is that in future reports from ESCOM get directed to us as well as to the department and ministry. And a failure to do so,
I think let's allow
we take action if we legally able to
respond.
Thank you.
To those things that she can respond to. Dr. Mampo.
Thank you, Honorable List. I will come back to that because there was something that was drawn to my attention.
Thank you, Chairperson. I am here. I'm actually thinking, usually when I do a very long presentation, I get very few questions. And today, when I did a short presentation, Chairperson and honorable members, the questions that you have asked are very difficult and very relevant. So I'm just going to try and group them so that I can give you a sense of the thinking when we did this. So in terms of SASRIA, Chairperson and honorable members, basically SASRIA was established after the Soweto uprising, so it's about 42 years now, and it's one of the few, if not the only one, that looks at or covers riots in terms of insurance. But basically, the SASRIA insurance is provided through agent companies. So I think businesses that have insurance just need to check in their contract whether they will be covered by SASRIA, because if you have an agent in between, you just want to make sure you're covered. So what I think is going to be important, Chairperson, is for businesses to make sure that if they go to, for example, outsource and they look for cover, they must make sure that they add SASRIA as part of the cover. I think because most businesses don't think
just allow the question to be answered before I can
disasters will affect them. They tend to save costs through not having SASRIA. So one
that
way
we can avoid that risk. Okay, let's get responses to those questions, and Honorable Sami will come in afterwards.
To form part of SASRIA, but that is one thing that we can try to do, is to make sure there's awareness that there is this particular insurance and it's not expensive from what I know, and businesses can form part of it. So Chairperson, I think from your calendar, I see that you'll be meeting
as quickly as we could
in the next couple of days, so I'm sure they will add
officer.
meat to this. But I think the key for me would be how this will be funded. So as I said in the presentation, the 3.9 billion is just the estimate of what SASRIA is going to need. When we were having this discussion, Chairperson and honorable members, they explained that they'll be needing between 2 billion and 7 billion, and this will be to augment their balance sheet. So the money that they need is not urgent. It can be done through the special bill, and also it can be done through the MTPS. So we're hoping, the maximum is about 7 billion. If there's a shortfall, then we have to consider additional funding for them in the MTBPS. Now, when we were looking at funding options
that the DPE received the presentation,
we looked at three possible funding sources.
Precisely,
we looked at
point,
reprioritization. We looked at tax increases. We also looked at what happens when
to get the document on the
we
eve of
increase
the
the
meeting.
borrowing. So all three options were looked at. We did the assessment. We went through the departmental budget to try and see what we can find. So what we did was we looked at the understanding today and what are the possibilities in terms of reprioritization. So when we did the reprioritization exercise, honorable members, we realized that because of the significant budget reductions that
on
were
Friday,
implemented in departmental budget, it is close to impossible to reprioritize such a significant amount of money. Therefore, we went through the budget, we looked at the understanding, and all we could find in terms of the first quarter understanding was less than 2 billion. I think it was like 1.5 billion. So we realized that now the departments have already committed their budget, so it's not possible to reprioritize this amount.
Getting closer
then we
into
also looked at the
a senior
possibility
scenario
of
of
raising debt and its implications.
One, the department
and we, from the analysis that was done, that was also not a viable option, and increasing taxes was also not a viable option. So we basically looked at the revenue collection from 2021 that was higher than projection. So basically, there was a 38 billion last year that was collected, which was higher than what we projected. So these interventions will be funded through that higher than projected revenue to avoid a situation where we have to reprioritize in a space where it's almost impossible to reprioritize, and given the fact that we can't really increase taxes in the current year. So the reason why we limited the intervention to 32 billion is because we had to look at what government can afford. So basically, Chairperson, this will be funded through last year's higher than expected revenue. So there's no impact on the debt, and also there is no impact on the spending envelope of the department where we were going to reprioritize. Then, Chairperson and honorable members, in terms of small businesses,
did not
let me just explain the process that took place.
Somewhat put us into
So
a
when
even if we
the
continue
riot
with the
started,
meeting,
the two departments came to Treasury, or basically we asked the departments to let us know whether they will be intervening in the space. So when we assessed the application, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition did a survey where they basically tried to quantify the cost of the disaster and also who was affected by this. So they did a survey and they spoke to different businesses. This includes shopping malls, it includes fast food outlets. They also looked at saloons, surgeries, barbershops, all of those
we can't really
shops or businesses. What they
received
also
the report
did was
in
they
the
tried
eve
to do this on a
of a
continuous
discussion
basis so that
of such
they update
complex
their numbers.
matters
So
that
basically
relate
what
to
DTIC
ESCOM.
proposed us when we were looking at the funding,
and though
that they were looking at
that is
the
the case,
category where they
yes,
do a critical infrastructure refurbishment. So that has been allocated 600 million. So this is where they support bulk infrastructure development in affected economic areas. Then the second one will be industrial loan facility, and this facility is basically to support manufacturing companies which are affected by the looting. Basically, the target for this Chairperson is to rebuild the infrastructure, the feeding, restocking, and some of the working capital. And this is done through, or it will be administered through the IDC. And this is basically
even worse in this
the businesses that are not covered by the insurance or funding, or the ones that have a gap between what the insurance pays out and what they need.
Department.
Then there's a retail recovery support fund. So this is not a grant, this is a fund. And basically this will provide partly interest-free loans to some of the companies that have been affected that don't even have the insurance, basically targeting the small companies. But also there's the
now
interest
the
makeup
fact
scheme that
the
will
ESCOM
provide
response
interest subsidy to
has failed to
exporters, and
meet
this will
the
be
expected
implemented
timelines.
in partnership with the South African
Therefore,
financial institutions, and this will be
a
aimed
fact
at supporting
of
companies that are
regulation or
affected by
this
the
and that.
crisis.
It's
So
a
the
matter
DTIC has
as well
different
of the fact that their own
interventions
processes
targeted
were
at
a bit
different
delayed
businesses
in this
within the
instance.
cohort
So
of businesses that have been affected by this.
No
and then
committee,
in terms of small
no
business, when they did the
who
application,
are
basically
saying,
they just
in a way, would want
reprioritize
to
money
indulge into the instances
to its entity,
of
which is
applying
FIFA,
their
and
minds
basically they will be doing the assessment
intricate
through
detail
the agency.
in as far
But what
as
we
ESCOM
have realized,
operations
as I said,
and
Chairperson,
responding
is
to
that
us
we have
on
to
matters
come
that
up
have
with
been
a way
referred to
in
them
which we
in a fair
avoid
way.
double dipping. So
Would
to
be
do
unfair
that,
to ESCOM,
we National
unfair to
Treasury
ourselves,
and
would
the
be unfair
presidency,
to
we're working
parliamentary
on
accountability
designing
processes.
a portal. This is its advanced
my
stages,
chair,
and basically
is that we
this
must
portal
as
will
well,
be
while
looking at,
strongly
will be ensuring
object
that all
to
businesses are
what has
registered
happened.
in the portal.
Indeed, let's not put
And
ourselves
the
into
allocations
a
will be captured
situation
in the
where we
portal.
would have to be unfair to the entirety
The
of
reporting
the
will also
process.
be captured
And we
in the
throw it
portal.
back
And
to
the reason
ESCOM
why you would need a
and the
portal
department
is to make sure
in
that
terms of their
whatever
response
business
and
is
plan.
allocated funding
So that
in the portal, it will be clear that this
futuristic
business has already
is that
gotten money from Sasria,
at
this one
least
got money
they
from
should model
DTIC.
their own
So it's a
responses quite
one-stop
appropriately in terms
portal
of the
where you
required
see
timelines
what
when they
has
have to
been
forward these
allocated
kinds of
to these
expenditure.
businesses to try and deal with double dipping. I mean, this is work in progress, but we already
in whatever way
implementing
you
it.
look at it, none
And
of the
Chairperson,
timelines,
because the businesses needed funding on an emergency basis, as Honorable
and I want to reiterate
asked,
the point, colleague.
is that we allocated the
unreasonable as this
1.3 billion
We
through
are
Section
not.
16 of the PFMA, where the
We were
funding
supposed to
or
have
the
met
funds
with the
were released immediately to
South
the
African
Department
Post
of
Office.
Trade,
The
Industry and
minister sent in
Competition, but we
correspondence
also make sure
explaining
that we reprioritize
reasonable and sound
for the
grounds for your
300
request for a
million
postponement, and
immediately
we
and also
granted
for the
it.
700 immediately. So the departments have already
There was an issue of an
been allocated
investigation
the
on
funding to
ESCOM
ensure that
matters. And the request was made that we give the department and ESCOM space and time to deal with those matters, and we
was
granted
not used for this purpose, Chairperson. If you remember when we came at the time of the budget, this
as
was
much
12
as,
billion,
quite
and
frankly,
most
you know,
of this has
I
been
would like to
allocated
believe
to
I'm not
the
hard-headed,
Department
but I
of Health
can.
for the vaccine and also to deal with
And we have
the
been
third wave.
very flexible
So basically,
as this
the contingency reserve
understanding
was only
all the
used
intricacies
for the
when we
purpose
just didn't
stated
have
in the
to
budget
actually.
and not for this intervention. So whatever money
And then now
we
we've been
left
set
in
up.
the contingency reserve will still
Honorable
be used
Hadebe, Honorable Van Minen, and Honorable Tolashe are expected to carry this hearing today, which is a continuation, not a new
and then
hearing.
the conditions that
Not
are
new.
attached to businesses, I think, Chairperson, the one that
And
was
then now they
key
must
for me was the
hear
fact
us
that
be
the
expected to
businesses
sit
that
and
will
ask
be
cosmetic
supported is the
questions,
businesses that
and we
will
tick boxes
continue
and say, as
to
this
do
committee
business,
we met
because
with
it didn't
ESCOM.
make sense to basically give businesses grant funding only to find that the businesses are just going to close shop. So the biggest condition is that they have to
And
stay
I think
in
that is
business
why
and they have to employ the people that
Not
they were
even
working
angry,
there.
I'm annoyed.
However, I don't think there were any conditions in terms of who they must employ and all of that. I think that would be the Department of Small Business that can assist the
on the
committee
question you
in
posed,
explaining how
having
they trying
asked on this
to
matter
deal
before,
with
was
the issue
advised
of
that the
South Africans
shareholder
versus
compact
non-South Africans working in
is
these
the one
businesses.
that
But for us, in terms of
dictates that
financing, the
there has
key
to be
condition was that you stay in business and then you continue, because some of the
presentations and
some of
reports
the
and
businesses
submissions to
wanted
Parliament
the insurance money and
over
then
the
they
Parliament.
close shop.
Paraphrasing
But
here.
one of those
So
conditions
that's
is
what
that
I
they
got, and
stay,
so that's why
open.
I flagged the question.
Chairperson, is in the event of
frankly,
the post office
very much in
and
support
how
of your proposal.
the people are receiving the grants. I think SASSA is trying its best.
All right, colleagues, I want to
deal with this. They have also been speaking to banks to try and reduce the queues in the post office. So I think it's a combination of, how do we easily, how do they easily transfer the funding to the recipient? And I'm talking to the financial banks when I help ease the pressure in terms of the post office. Chairperson, the post office has a lot of it's still, they have
in the hands of the lead members. Honorable
issues they still have to deal with. So
I wanted to say, by the way, we still don't have approved
to make sure
report.
that they spread
We don't know
the
the status
responsibility
of this report that
paying
was
social
finished.
grants and not limit them to the post office only.
Right.
The question on the COVID impact on education, I think, Chair, what I can say here is that at the time
Chair, can I just
of
correct myself?
the budget,
The
Cabinet asked a National Treasury and the Department of Higher Education to look at the sustainability of the fee-free higher education, and we have been working on that, and some of the outcomes have been presented in Cabinet, but the overall response and the plans on how this is going to be funded will definitely be in the
appreciate the advice.
Chairperson, you asked the difficult question of what to do with departments who underspend. And my worry is that I'm coming back to the committee in October, and I have a lot of departments that they've underspent. So I must think about how I'm going to answer you when I come back, because I'm sure you're going to raise the question again. But I think what is important for me is the reasons why they underspend. If the reasons why they underspend is because of inefficiencies, then we will have to look at the programs and then see how we can change the program. So, for example, if you have a department that is not spending because of the lockdown, it is acceptable. But if you have a department that is not, it's underspending because the program design is flawed and they're not getting fit for, or they're not getting efficiencies in their program, I think we have to look at the program design. But as you may be aware, Chairperson, it's very difficult for the departments to change the way in which they do business. But we've been working with them this year
to something which is fundamentally wrong in terms of principle and process.
In redesigning some of the spending programs that they have, and that work will be presented by the minister
in one meeting, the CEO of ESCOM
or at the time of the budget, with the hope that
there are
some
so
of
many
the
of these
recommendations
meetings that you must
the
attend
Parliament and this committee will have a look at them and then see which ones you think are
and as far as possible as this committee we have
and then we will be implementing those. So we have been doing
to give
quite a lot
reasonable
of
lead time to our meetings.
The government system to ensure
and we have not at any point received something that says there's a clash
ask
or you will
Dr.
not be ready.
Rendani
We've never.
to deal with the police.
And so when we send correspondence and we don't get responses,
Just
I
on
assure
the
you my
just before
assumption
he joins, I
is
see
that
the
we're
credit
good to
loan
go.
guarantee scheme. Chairperson and honorable members, this
it's like what people say in relationships, whether it's a marriage or home joy. Communication is key.
Because we are still redesigning it because it was not
if we don't agree to
the
something,
results
the committee will say so. Would know here we are not in
so we are still working on the scheme. We have been consulting just to see
this whole thing
is there a better way to implement the scheme. So the reason why it's not part of the package is because by the time the president made the announcement, we were not ready with the new design, and we still needed to do consultation, especially with the departments and the banking sector that were implementing the scheme. So once we redesign it and it's finalized, I'm certain that we will be coming to the committee to present the new scheme. Rendani, please come through for police and defense.
The time to go through the voluminous presentation of 127 pages.
Good morning, honorable members. And thanks, Mampo. Chairperson, I will try to address some of the few questions raised. Let me start with the question that was raised by Honorable Imam and I think yourself. it
and then
talks
we
to
get an
the
assurance at some point by the
value for money
today that
issues.
the presentation that our colleagues will be preparing on.
Let me start by
with
making
the
a
other
proposal
documentation from the SIU
that
has been
perhaps
approved.
when we appear before the committee, when we present
It will be regrettable
expenditure
if we have to continue
reports,
babysitting.
I think the
such
same
big
invite
entities
can
on
also go to the
basics
Department
due
of Planning,
process.
Monitoring and Evaluation, so that they can
This is
also present
administration
on
101,
the what the
if
money
not
is
grade
buying.
12 or maybe grade
So,
8.
and then coming specifically to the issue of the deployment, I think we must ask ourselves a question like, what would have happened had we not deployed additional police personnel and the military? It appears now that it's peaceful. Do we attribute that to the deployment?
We will end up
what would have been the situation
that
like
there is a
without
tension between
additional
SCOPA
police and the military?
Whereas none
So I think
exists.
we're beginning to see the impact of this deployment.
These kind of things,
because at the moment, we no longer have riots. It appears as if it's peaceful. However, budgeting for this deployment, it's almost like trying to predict weather.
You will be readily available.
Because when we started, for example, the defense force
which was less than 7
was
days.
expected to exit, I think, around 12th of August. And now the deployment has been extended to the 12th of September.
And then we will communicate.
In Mozambique, they're deployed for 3 months. They're expected to exit, I think, on the 15th of October.
Then ultimately, this thing wastes Parliament's time.
On that basis, this extension is almost like budgeting for the Commission of Inquiry.
There's so much wrong
too, because of the extension.
Finance management in this country, we could be dealing
it has
with
been
other
very
things.
difficult. The same with this.
Because if communicated on time, we could slot someone else in
with police, for example, when they started with 35,000 members.
It's a waste of, and time is money. Time
they had
is
to jack up the numbers to 58,000.
Time is a public.
It's a moving target, Chairperson, which is a bit difficult
and the inability to appreciate that on its own
on something like that. However, we'll keep engaging and them monitoring the situation to see as to whether
like I've said,
if there are this extension, and then we'll see how best to fund this additional deployment.
Because it's not happening for the
on the issue of corruption.
So Honorable Fernand, Honorable
I would also like to propose that perhaps the committee can invite the Special Investigating Unit and the NPA, maybe including the DPCI, the Hawks,
and if it
to make a presentation specifically on COVID investigation, on COVID investigations.
Honorable Hatebe and Honorable DM,
the NPA, they have got an indicator on the number of people convicted of crime or corruption in the private sector. So it is not that maybe we're putting emphasis on the public, but we're also putting emphasis on corruption in the private sector. Perhaps also the committee can invite the NPA where they can elaborate, for example, on the profile of the nature of these people investigated, the nature of corruption cases, so that you can get the full details in terms of what they're doing in the private sector regarding the investigation of
deal with these reports. We don't want
I think I've dealt with all the questions that I had to
other DGs when they appeared before Zondo Commission that in Parliament.
Thanks, Rendani. Chairperson, just on the last question that I didn't address, how to measure impact of the funding. I think part of the design of the portal will have an element where we can measure the successes of the businesses that have been allocated funding vis-a-vis the ones that didn't survive. But I think what we will have to do when I go back is just to make sure that when they design the portal, most of these value for money, how to measure which businesses got the money, the names of the businesses and all of that will have to be included in the portal so that when we come and report, we can easily say 100 businesses got the money, of the 198 of them survived, and they have employed this number of people. So I think that information will be captured in the portal that the National Treasury and the Presidency
and I remember that you gave us
signals
as to how to respond,
I think we covered
to some of the issues that you were raising in the committee. and how we should prepare ourselves. And immediately after that meeting, I took it upon myself to inform, I think, the group here at ESCOM that there is a particular way in which members of SCOPA wants us to address questions that we are supposed to address.
I want to ask a question, one quick question.
In accordance with your requirements.
She said, I think,
and that's a long time ago.
Some of the funding was paid out on an emergency basis.
On trust, and therefore,
is that information
I
has
find
been
it
captured
totally
on that very same point?
Unacceptable. That
my
at this
understanding of
late
that portal, it serves as a control mechanisms to make sure that there's no double dipping. So are those details going to be captured there to make sure that those companies that have been funded, probably say via DTI, because the portal is still work in progress, will be captured, they have the information on the system so that they don't do double dipping. The last issue has to do, I accept that the deployment of the army and the police is a moving target. And perhaps from National Treasury, the only aspect that we want to hear is whether monies have been allocated, and for us to also appreciate their difficulty in budgeting for this. But the assessment of whether the deployment has worked or not, I think is really a political matter and a political decision, because then we are going to open a can of worms about who agreed with the deployment, who didn't agree, what were the reasons, and what were the issues, what were the political considerations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kwankwa. Any other honorable member who would like to have a second bite?
Yes, Chair. Just one question on the. I forgot to ask about this. Perhaps I might have read the wrong slide. On the issue of police and defense, because we sort of learned a hard lesson during the previous, during the violence and riot, whereby it appears that the issue on goods and services was a bit a challenge, especially on the police. So maybe by way of looking at the budget, to what an extent would you comment on the issue of allocation to goods and services, because it does seem to have been very critical issue. Because now, if we learn late that now actually the budget was for just salaries, it may mean a different story now. I just want to check that. Thank you very much.
Any other honorable member? Okay, I take it that our questions have been answered. Just on SASRA, we're definitely meeting SASRA next week on the 8th of September. So some of the questions that were asked may better be addressed by them when they appear before us next week. I said we'll work out on the Department of Employment and Labor, UIF, and Compensation Fund to try and get some time, because they've been at the center again of these interventions, and again they are the ones who have been big time defrauded in the process. Dr. Mampo.
Chair.
Yes, Honorable Kwangu. Is it Honorable Kwankwa or Mlenzana?
Yes, there might be. I accept that there might be a few instances arrested in the private sector for corruption. Yeah. But the problem is a problem where, let's go back to the 2010 FIFA World Cup, where big companies defrauded the state. They colluded, but only those issues were only settlements. And you didn't see any CEO or of a major company being arrested for the fraud committed by their companies. KPMG recently, with the Gupta's issue, I beg your pardon, what happened to them, right? For giving fraudulent audits. No accountability, you resign and it's done. But if it's in the public sector and you happen to be Ngabayom Zikwangwa, right, or some Joe Soap, then you can't do settlements. There's no luxury to do that. You must be arrested and go and serve your time. So these are issues that we need to discuss, perhaps at a different forum, not here, as we try to tighten laws that deal with this fraud and corruption issue, both in the public and private sectors.
I think, Honorable Kwankwa, it's a valid point, and this committee must deal with this, because it's the money that you appropriate from this committee that it's misused, abused, and illegally gotten from the institutions that we allocate money to. So, as we always say, as long as you get money from government, you are a client. So there is some accountability that we really need here. And this thing of related to that, of people say, you hear that people have paid the money back, and that was the end of the story. But there was a crime which was committed before that, and no people seem to be satisfied with that. But I think we should find a way of dealing with that, perhaps in this forum, perhaps again with relevant people, especially those who always accept settlements with our money. But I wanted to say to Dr. Mampo, as you deal with the expenditures, so that you are forewarned, don't accept the explanation of COVID. This time in this financial year, there was no lockdown that prevented companies from working. So that explanation has lost flavor, and it won't be acceptable. So when you deal with whoever you're dealing with, try to find a better reason. The COVID restriction reason that won't be accepted by this committee. Support staff, I had requested you to do a research on the department institutions which are perennial and underspenders, right? Obviously, we're seeing the reasons that they've been giving us at different times. But all members, what I want to do is to write to those departments now, so that they don't always rely on Dr. Mampo, so that they can tell us exactly what they are doing, why they are underspending, and what corrective measures are they going to have, and what are their projections as far as the year end is concerned. How much of the budget would they have been used? So that we try and find some a carrot and stick approach I propose, so that we should be able to move funds. People are going to use funds, not people are going to bank the money that has been borrowed at a high cost to the fiscal. Honorable Mare, please mute. Honorable Mare, please mute. Honorable Mare, please mute. Honorable Mare, please mute. Thank you. Okay. Dogotel. Mampo, please.
I'm here, Chair. I just want Rendani to start with the security cluster matters, and then I will end with the DTIC and the portal. Rendani?
Thanks, Chairperson. Let me address one issue raised by, I think it's Honorable Kaiso, the allocation for goods and services. Over and above what you are seeing, the 250 million for police, through reprioritization, they are also making provision for goods and services. The biggest pressure is on COE, as they have to deploy additional police personnel. And then the issue of the convictions, investigation of crime, corruption in the private sector. I will reiterate again that perhaps the invitation of the criminal justice system, because there are issues of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. So when do they apply alternative dispute resolution mechanism vis-a-vis locking up these criminals in correctional facilities? I will propose that perhaps maybe a conversation with the criminal justice system maybe can shed more light on issues like this. Thanks.
No, that's fine. Sorry, ma'am. That's fine, Rendan. We hear that. I'll retort by saying that alternate dispute resolution should be colorblind. Dr. Mampo?
Thank you, Chairperson. So the question on the details, we're working parallel, the systems are parallel. So the DTIC is capturing all of this information now that we are still working on the portal. And once the portal is ready, that information will be transferred to the portal to make sure that there are no issues. So for now, that information would be in the DTIC. When we were talking to them and considering their funding mechanism, what we said to them was that they have to report on a monthly basis on the spending of this and basically monitoring the spending pattern. So we have included that condition when we gave them the allocation. But for now, they will be responsible to make sure that they capture the information through the DTIC and other entities that they'll be using. But once the portal is ready, that information will be transferred to the portal so that we can consolidate the systems. Chairperson, those would be the queries that I needed to respond to. Thank you very much.
I thought I was going to get your comment when I said that please don't accept the reason of people not being able to do work because of COVID-19 lockdown. I said the financial year under review, there was never a time when businesses were said they must.
I agree, Chairperson. Yeah, and I'm already looking at my report. I'm like, yo,
yeah, it's not by they must come with some better reasons, not that one. Thank you.
Chair. One last input. I'm not going to say anything after this.
Yeah, no problem.
It's with regards to this issue where we provide, I know it's not a national treasury issue, but it needs to be, this discussion needs to be held at a broader government forum. The issue where we provide no protection to locals in the labor market. I want to give an example, Chairperson. In 2007, the African Peer Review Mechanism issued a report, a country report on South Africa, where they warned about the unfair, they called it an unfair competition between South Africans in the labor market and illegal and undocumented migrants. The point I'm making is that obviously we will not discriminate. We can create a framework that will ensure that it does not discriminate against other people unfairly. But the fact of the matter is we can't be giving money to companies that are not patriotic, to companies that do not employ South Africans for racist reasons. I'm making this point because I once said in Cape Town, there was a company, a restaurant at Sea Point, that declared and said to people, I'm not going to employ South Africans here because they are lazy, right? Now, if you go around the country, the hospitality and other sectors, these companies proudly employ people, not because they like them, but because they want to exploit them, right? And it's about the profit motive. Now, I'm saying, if you look at the number of companies and the malls and the shopping centers that have been looted, something has to be done to ensure that South Africans are employed in those companies. But otherwise, why do we then put taxpayers' money into that? Why do we bail them out with taxpayers' money? They should tap into their reserves if they can and then continue as they please. But we need to create a framework and some form of regulation which is going to make sure that South Africans are not excluded from an employment perspective now, not as business owners, from the economic mainstream of the country. Otherwise, we're doing a disservice to the people who actually elected us to parliament if we don't address this issue.
I think it's a valid point. You can add the trucking business. It has been also identified as a sector where owners deliberately discriminate against South Africans. Dr. Mampo, I think what we are saying is that please can you consider that, because we must start somewhere as a condition of a bailout, because that's what we are doing to these companies as well. that there should be a framework of some sort. The question of ensuring that the majority of people who benefit from employment opportunities are by and large South Africans. We shouldn't be afraid to say that, and even to put those conditions. And in most cases, you'll find that people who are undocumented in the country, they also don't pay tax. So the money that we are appropriating here is a taxpayer's money. So I think the point is valid. Please look at it, and as we are saying, let's start somewhere. Okay.
Yes, Chairperson, will definitely consider it when we discuss with the departments. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't think there's anything which needs you, not unless there's something you are itching to tell the committee, Dr. Mampo, or that we are done.
Chairperson, I will bring my itchy issues when I can present the spending. Thank you so much, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll then be going to agenda item number 5. We'll be looking at the minutes of the 24th of August 2021. Therein, minutes. I'm right. Minutes of the 24th of August. Honorable members, they were sent to us. Oh, yes. Any mover for the adoption?
Chair, it's Honorable Sarupin. I move for the adoption.
Thank you, Honorable Sarupin. Any seconder?
I second, Chair. It's Matafa.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. That takes care of agenda item number 5. Colleagues, support staff. Is anyone able to respond to the issue that I raised, that I had said, let's start the process of trying to identify the underspenders and so on. Support staff. Somebody must say something. Yes. Did you hear my question?
Yes, Chairperson, I've got the question. And yes, we have taken the brief and we are discussing it. We've discussed it with Noliolo as the researchers and the Usifiso, and we are already working on it, Chairperson. Maybe what will help, Chairperson, because sometimes it's difficult to set your own deadline. If we can submit ourselves, Chairperson, maybe you give us a deadline that we can work on so that we can put pressure on ourselves.
Tomorrow.
A bit too much, Chairperson.
Chairperson, no.
You must be careful what you ask for, because you may just get it. Let's discuss it.
Chairperson, it will be ready before we engage National Treasury, Chairperson, on the first quarter expenditure.
Okay, we'll talk, but it's something that we need definitely to deal with, so that we also seem to be proactive on some of these things, right? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Darren, are there any announcements from your side?
Chairperson, no announcements from my side.
And what are we?
Tomorrow the link will follow immediately after this meeting. I'm sending out the link, Chairperson.
Okay. And we're meeting with PPO tomorrow?
We're meeting with the FFC Chairperson also on this bill.
Okay. Thank you. That takes care of agenda item number 6. Honorable members, this brings us to the end of the meeting, and thank you very much for raising the issues that you have raised, and we should continue doing that on an ongoing basis. Thank you. The meeting stands adjourned.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Long live the chair.
Thanks, Honorable Nkwankwa.
Recording stopped.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Later. Cheers. Bye.